All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of L1A, Love One Another. We are still rolling with Jay Fechtel and Dan and Kristin O'berski talking about disciples in business. It's been an awesome conversation, and it was so good. We just kept rolling. We're going for part two. So thank you guys for sticking around. Or if you're first jumping in, I'd encourage you to start with part one of this, but it'll still be just as good if you do part two, but I would encourage us to start there. So guys, welcome back to the show.
Welcome to the L1A podcast, a space to connect, communicate, and collaborate for the advancement of the kingdom in North America and beyond. Here we will discuss the disciple-making movement that is happening in this Western context and the return to God's design for discipleship, church, and life.
So let's just jump right in to you guys are not only in business, but you're image bearers in your own home. You're making disciples. You're part of the church that's throughout your city. So can we just even pull back from business in a second? And what does church look like for your family?
I'm a pastor's kid. Kristin's a pastor's kid. And I struggle with structure of the American structure of church. And thankfully, I'm growing up a little bit in my understanding and empathy and humility and God's made so many of us and meets us where we're at. So whatever mechanism that is and what it looks like, I can get behind it. If there's fruit and there's humility and there's abiding in Christ, I can get behind it, right? And so I can meet you there. For Kristin and I, church is daily. They come together regularly at this point in our life is principally around Kristin and I and our kids, and then we provide some community. So there's not a set structure. And we tease out what the church of our community and our city looks like every week. And so sometimes some of our kids, when you got 6 kids, you got 6 different worlds of how they experience Jesus and where they're at. And so we'll go hang out with some friends at a gathering, a traditional box church, as I call it. And we create some rhythms for the kids and access to, again, allow them to be met wherever. And so, but from an unperfected statement, that's our church. If that makes sense.
That's the simplest expression.
There you go.
You guys in your home.
Yeah.
Jay, can you share? I know you've probably heard before that have listened to the previous episode about one body, but can you just give us a brief overview of just not only church in your home, but what God's done in Tampa?
Yeah. Well, Brother Lee Wood, began faithfully just in his home, he and Stacy, here in Tampa, and over the years reached others, and I was one of the ones that came in contact with Lee. I had always been a little bit of a reform-minded, traditional church guy, but with always trying to reform it and, press it into new spaces that it didn't seem to be going when I was reading the Bible. And I was kind of thinking, man, I got to do more of this. How do I do that through my church? And so I even got teasingly called a rebel at a couple of them, teasingly because I'm great friends with these pastors that, I used to be a part more week to week with. But we have a church that meets in our home for the last 4 years, and we're part of One Body Church in Tampa, which is really a decentralized network of home churches and churches that meet in fitness buildings, wherever. Some meet different places. In our case, our home church began in our home, and it began with me just prayer walking my neighborhood and engaging with some other people who were in One Body, and we have still maintained a really solid rhythm over the years. It's really amazing. We grow a lot there. We're at the point now where we meet in different homes now. So we have 4 different homes that we share and rotate meeting in from time to time. And that's a beautiful thing too, because you just see other people, we're modeling for others about how to do that, and then they're doing it. And it's created a really nice rhythm. We're probably from St. Pete all the way up to North Tampa and even beyond in the Inverness area and going over to Lakeland a little bit. Now we have many groups, and then also what we recognize as churches meeting, really carrying out practices that a normal church would, just in a decentralized, smaller setting. And obviously it's very focused. We're very focused on disciple making. We have a kind of a mission vision statement and our desire is really to launch and grow disciple multiplying movements that transform communities until the whole world comes to know Jesus. So it's a simple sort of focus: make disciples, see communities transformed, which means we're engaging, with the least of these quite actively here, and we're really kind of working according to gifts. We have a lot of people in one body generally who a lot of diversity, both in socioeconomic, racial, and spiritual backgrounds, new, old, young, wealthy, not wealthy, but what we're really focused on in the midst of all that is just loving one another. That's the real theme and focus, and obviously L1A, is a reflection of that. We consider ourselves a part of the L1A family of churches around the country, and are really encouraged by that. But just trying to recognize, even within our own home church, who's more evangelical, who's more prophetic, who's more apostolic, or the shepherds and teachers, and you see that coming up. And we have we have time of worship. We've got somebody that plays music now, and we have a meal together. Every time we gather, we begin with a meal. We follow the 3/3 format where we begin with look back, look up, look forward, and just carry out those practices consistently week by week. And we seem to all be growing, and there's accountability in that too. So that's. But Terry and I don't have kids in the home right now. And when we did, we were still trying to pursue probably a lot of kind of similar to what Dan and Kristin are. How do you develop rhythms where your kids are connecting with kids? And our children participate from time to time with us when they're back in town or in our area. So they'll join in, with our home church. But for the most part, we are now just trying to hear God about how he wants us to serve within that network.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I can even speak from Tampa, Jay, from you, from Lee, Dominic, Damien, others. Y'all have been a blessing to our churches in Indy for years now, like a model to what we're supposed to do. And even from a business standpoint, as you and Lee both encouraged us, like, hey, the church that you have in Indy, it's not a parachurch, it's not a nonprofit, like it is the church. Mm-hmm. And then you helped connect me to people at like NCLL, for example, National Center of Life and Liberty, and they helped me write my bylaws for the church. They helped us put together all of like the nuts and bolts to become legal and have resources to do that. Yeah. And so that was a tremendous blessing to us. And then even helping write out, hey, here's a quick start guide for churches and other places. Like that came out of some of those business structures that were, coming from within the church. Yeah. So really cool. Now that you've been able to do that, you've passed that to us, and I've literally passed that to other cities doing the same thing. So I just want to honor you and just say thank you for helping with that. And I know another thing that Lee mentioned that you guys do is...
Thank the Lord, brother, because we've been equally encouraged by you.
Yes.
Indianapolis has challenged us as well, so it's been great.
Hey, we're failing forward as well, and we have some tremendous leaders and laborers there that I'm really grateful for. And something else that we're trying to step into that I believe y'all do, tell me if this is true or not, but that your business actually helps provide the bookkeeping for the church. Is that correct?
Yes. We have a lot of church meetings right out of our business office. We have this big conference table that's gigantic, and it's this old relic that everybody crowds around, and we do a lot there. But we also found that we had the capacity to merge in the financial and some of the administrative through our existing business footprint, and it just flows pretty well. I kind of get involved in that a little bit, because I'm here, and the business has become. It's almost like the church, the people in the church know the people in our business. In fact, one of our elders serves as a chaplain to our company, and also is engaged in disciple making, in the communities, and so there's this really cool, somewhat organic but also structured, in areas working together that occurs between church and business. And then we're also trying to help develop and create some micro business opportunities for some in the church as well. So and we've had discipleship training here as well from people around the country have come in. And there's this connected web of activity.
That's so good. There's a couple things I want to touch on there in just a second, but just to move on to something that I'd really like us to all to dive into. As you guys know, and listeners may or may not know, there's a big wealth transfer that's happening in the generations right now, and it's not looking very good. This is going off in the deep end, the weeds a little bit, but donor advised funds or DAFs. There's a lot of evil going on. I'm not going to get into it now, but a lot of companies are restricting these funds to go towards where families and businesses really want them to go towards. And so as we're preparing for this wealth transfer, ministry as usual, church as usual, probably won't be the same as it's been the last 100 years. So one very important thing moving forward is how in the churches can we create sustaining businesses from within the church that's creating perpetuity for the church to move forward sustainably, scalably, without being dependent on outside funds. So could we transition there just for a second? I know some of this is kind of talking into the future, but we're also living into this in some ways already. But as this transition is happening in our culture, how important is it that we're helping from disciples and churches launch new businesses so that the church can sustain? And we know that not everybody has to be in business. That's something that, Dan, that we were talking about a little bit earlier, is that we actually need sent ones that are full-time, that are being paid for either by the church, by others. Like we need full-time laborers. But we need a lot more of business leaders who are helping sustain the church and starting new businesses from within the church. So that's kind of a long segue into what we're going to talk about. But Jay, Kristin, Dan, can you say anything about the importance of needing sustainability for the churches and new businesses?
Well, maybe I can kind of parlay your last comment, Jay, and what you were asking as far as the involvement of even bookkeeping and how church and business flow together. And Lee Wood, a mutual good friend of all of ours, when I sat down and I said, like, here's my world, like speak into it and tell me all my gaps and where I got to activate around my faith journey a little more. And he's like, Dan, you're a church planner. I was like, no. I was like, what are you talking about, dude? Like, you're a church planner. And I think there's this deconstruction that has to happen. Like, if you have any foundation in the traditional church, in too much history and language, like, you got to unpack some of the stuff that we've done to bucket this stuff. Is you're a CPA. If I did bookkeeping for my churches, they'd be like, bad idea, right? And so, being in what God has made us to be and then seeing that replicated. So for Chris and I, we plant churches that have to do with real estate and finance and small business. Because then we seek to identify assets that are already at work in people, right? It's just like missionaries, right? Like, hey, if you go thinking that Jesus didn't go before you, you ought to just like roll up and head back home. Right? Like there's no point in going there. So just as in missionally, you're looking for where God's at work. That's what we're looking for. Where's the asset that God has made us? And then how do we liberate that into what God has made them to be? And when you do that in a CPA, it turns into an accounting firm where people fall in love with Jesus.
That's right.
Right? Like it's just the outflow. And then by the way, they don't need missional support. Right? We came across a guy that he was passionate about fitness. He had spent 9.5 years in jail. And we were like, okay, let's do it. Let's build out some space. Let's get you going. And he wanted to help keep others from falling into what they were doing. And so we worked on this church planning of a small business and fitness, right? And it wasn't going to be, it was going to be something that actually could make him into what he wanted to be. And so in all of those things, so like what we're seeing in sustainability, one, if it's business, you should know that just because Jesus is a part of it doesn't mean it doesn't fail. Yeah. Like from a financial and business perspective. And it's practicing and learning. We're getting better at it and better and better. And I think we'll keep on being more effective as time goes about. And partially is asking enough questions to see, like, what are the assets that God's really given you? God tends to use the story of our yesterday for our story of tomorrow.
That's good.
So we're more effective in it. So those are the elements that we start looking for in people that say, hey, I need to go down this path, or here's an opportunity, and then it's a self-sustaining church. It just happens to be called a business. And so we get rid of these terms, parachurch and church and missionary, and it's just like, no, you're Kristin.
Yeah.
Like, God, by the grace of God, made you, and you had 4 kids, and God brought 2 other kids into the mix, and like, so that's Kristin. Like, so how do I go into that? And just like with Jay, is he knows how to build houses. He's an accountant, and he has an eye for design. What he really is passionate about is new designs, right? Things that are beautiful, creating and restoring the creation in Eve that we have, that we get to call Earth, right? Which is this new heaven, right? And reoccurring. So I'm super getting distracted along the path of sustainable business, but maybe that's the basis that we can roll into of, like, how are we identifying businesses and people, or people that want to be disciple makers who need sustainability? And so that's what we're praying through on a daily basis, and getting better at asking those questions of small business as a multiplying movement strategy.
Yeah. And Jay, you touched a little bit on micro businesses too. We don't have to get into that now, but even, churches throughout the city and businesses that are, coming through those churches, helping other nations and other people think that way too, because there's so much dependence in other countries on money from the West. And I feel like if we're ahead of churches in other countries in anything, it's that, because of, I think, our prosperity. We don't have that of a problem, but we're helping others in other nations to not be dependent. So helping them think, hey, can you turn this into a farm? Can you sew these clothes and sell them for a profit? Can you use this technology company to actually finance the church? And helping them to get off of dependence, and ultimately laying that same groundwork here in the United States. So we're trying to help parachurch ministries and organizations like move towards church. And we're trying to help businesses move towards self-sustainability and churches within cities, and then do that, the same thing here as it is there, as our friend Lee would say, the same thing.
That's right.
In all places. And so like in Indy, for example, from the churches, there's been a gym that started. There's been a school that started. There's well-watered gardens that have been started through the churches. There's some consulting firms that people are using to make disciples. Some of our people were in pharmaceuticals, and they're using that to share the gospel and make disciples, because work and worship is the same word in Genesis, and work came before the fall. I think that's interesting, right? Like, work was holy before the fall. And so if it was redeemed then,
It was just a lot more fruitful.
it was just a lot more fruitful,
Right.
way less thistles, way less sweat. But it's redeemable.
Yes.
And not only is it redeemable, it's scalable for the kingdom. So just to kind of close out our time together, I'll ask each of you just one final question. So Jay, first to you, what advice or encouragement would you give to someone who's looking to get into business for the sake of ministry or making disciples? That they're fresh, maybe they have all these crazy ideas. What would you encourage them as they're just getting started in business and disciple making?
Well, I would, first of all, just touch back on your prior comment about the donor advised funds that are getting more restrictive. That's a true concern. They're actually put a plug in for National Christian Foundation, because we are partnering with them. Actually, one body here, we have a donor advised funds set up, and some of our individuals have donor advised funds there. But we have one set up dedicated to receiving funds for the persecuted. That if any, actually for home churches too, for the home church network and movement, but others who are interested in donating to that cause. And it's a great organization that definitely will not restrict. That is their mission, so more people moving their donor advised funds to NCF, I think, would be a good thing. I've been really encouraged by Dan in his creativity, thinking through this whole question that you just asked about, how do we do that, and his focus, and beginning to see the business development as a church development. I mean, we're all the church. Any follower of Christ, we're all part of the body of Christ. And so we are his church, and how that manifests in different places, it can manifest through business, because sometimes the business is the only connection really that some people will ever have with what you might call a church. it's the people of God, obeying Him inside of that, and then beginning to bring the practices. And a lot of business owners by gifting are either apostolic, or some are shepherd, more pastor shepherd gifted, and are teaching and actually shepherding, groups of people inside business. So it's wonderful. But as far as the advice that goes, I appreciate the comment earlier about not everybody should be in entrepreneurial business, I would say, because not everybody is called to do that or gifted. There are some giftings that go along with that. And I think one of the first things is, I saw a study from Harvard one time that said the marks of, they boiled down 2 marks of great leaders. One is that they had a high self-awareness. They really understood who they were and who they're not. And another was that they were self-disciplined and, just stayed at it and with discipline. And the self-awareness piece, I think, is so important, because I even remember some of my early years and even developing a business, I have to recognize what I'm gifted at and what I'm not gifted at, so that if I'm going to develop a business and it's just going to be me, I better have some people around me who can step in, and I can either hire to do those things I'm not good at, or build a team, that can do the things in a synergistically way, where one is gifted at this and one is gifted at that. And you see that in businesses all the time. But if someone jumps into business and is not really clear about their gifts and what their strengths and weaknesses are, and that's going to be a problem. So get in touch with that. And then, the sense of calling. Has God really called you into business, or are you really just looking for an economic income stream, that can be sustainable for you? I think a lot of people go, wow, this is so hard raising money, or so hard working in a job. I'd rather have my own business where I'm in control. Well, hey, only God is in control. And you have to obey. If He wants you to do a business, do a business. But if He's just wanting you to get content where you are and buckle down and be more disciplined, then maybe that's what you ought to do instead of doing a business. I mean, that's not to throw water on the idea of doing a business, but
no, that's so necessary.
But you can get in it for the wrong reasons. So really understanding God's calling about it, and how you're gifted. And then, obviously, I love the idea of just community business, like where you're partnering with people who may have capital. Like maybe you don't have capital, but maybe there's a like-minded business developer, Dan O'berski, or Kristin too, who you could come along and just say, hey, is there something we could do together where we could merge our talents to accomplish this vision that God has given us? And we've done that as well. I've done some of that with actually some overseas business as well, but more here in town, in our community, just trying to disciple and mentor new business owners into doing what they do even better. And so that would be, a third aspect, is just try to partner with others who are like-minded.
Jay, you're just full of wisdom bombs. That's some amazing practical advice. Even some things I'm going to take away from that. Dan, question for you. I'm asking like the quick 3 at the end of most episodes that are tailored towards the specific topic. So the second question, the quick 3 for you. If you're a business leader and you're discouraged, you've been trying to make disciples, you're trying to work the mission of God within the business and in your community, but you're really discouraged. What's some encouragement or advice or wisdom that you can point their way?
So not to be mean to somebody, but there's probably something you just got to stop doing.
Yeah.
And start doing something simpler and easier wherever God's got you. Like, I don't think any of this is that hard. Like, if you're an entrepreneur, here's a good way to test it. Like, do something and see if you can get a return on that investment with whatever you have. And if you can't, you're probably not an entrepreneur. You might be one of the other 5 voices. And so, like, look at the other elements of how somebody else is doing it and adjust. Be humble, hungry, and smart. Those are like a big part of our lifestyle and life calling of, like, stop thinking you got it figured out and do something different. Like, do the opposite. Whatever you were doing, it's not working, do something else.
Yeah.
If you were walking up and talking to people, well, stop walking up and talking to people and start praying for them. Or go buy a pie for them and sit down and eat with them, right? Like, do the opposite. So I think, like, stop what you're doing and do something different.
Yeah. That's good. So even assessing what you're doing, like, hey man, this isn't working.
Yeah.
You know what? Like even praying, like God, what can I do that's different?
Yeah.
You
Maybe
know,
you
simple
suck
things.
at praying. And maybe he wants to stop you talking and start listening.
Hey, there you
right?
go.
Like he's he's a pretty cool guy. But
He is. He is. And he meets us where we are.
yes.
So final question. This is just a fun one that I ask everybody at the end. So Kristin, what's just the most fun and enjoyable memory that comes to mind, just in general?
Ooh. Yeah.
Have to dig deep for that one, or just whatever just pops into
Come
your
on.
head.
Well, so, I mean, there's a couple things that come to mind, but are we talking about Barbados? Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
she said to me,
He's like giving her the look like, yeah, it's Barbados.
I would say until we took a family road trip out west, my
There we go.
favorite day was going on a catamaran in Barbados, and we got to jump in with sea turtles, and we got to just swim around
That's
and snorkel
awesome.
with them, and just got to hang out on this beautiful catamaran in Barbados. That was
Yeah.
amazing.
yeah, there you go.
That's so good. And in loving one another, like and in business and disciple making, it's just not serious and work all the time. Like we need that space to connect. We need that space to rejuvenate, to get in touch with one another and with the Lord. And so just encouragement to everybody, like one of the reasons we ask that question is like we need that margin. We're not God. Like we have limits, and knowing those limits and humility is a big deal, walking with one another and walking with the Lord. Well, I know there's so much more that we could get into, and I know there's some future episodes of like talking how does businesses even bring community transformation. So those that are listening, stay in tune. We're going to be talking about a lot more things, how business can really transform communities and touch the world. But Dan, Kristin, Jay, love you guys. Thank you so much. This has been a super enlightening episode.
Wonderful.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Thanks, Zach.
Thank you for listening to the L1A podcast. If you are interested in learning more about this topic or getting connected with the other disciple makers in your area, visit loveoneanother.life. Again, that's loveoneanother.life.